And now I would like to invite the first person in our list of speakers tonight, Joe Fargnoli, who's from the New York Space Alliance. And as you can see, they're up there, and he's going to tell us a little bit about who they are and what they do, and then introduce our guests for tonight. Thank you, Joe.
All right, thank you, Ellen. Yeah, I'm Joe Fargnoli, one of the co-founders of the New York Space Alliance, along with Sydney Nakahodo. Thank you, everybody, for coming out tonight. We have a special theme tonight about a relationship that we're forming with NASA to help transfer technologies into the New York economy. So I want to do a little introduction to NYSA, as we do every time we have an AstroCafe, of reminding you of the great things we're doing and our objectives. And then I'm going to introduce Dan, who's the technology transfer lead with NASA. And then Tom Wilson is the Senior Vice President for Northrop Grumman Innovation Systems, who will talk about a very pragmatic, large and successful program for in-orbit servicing that benefited from a lot of NASA technology transfer. So first, thank you for coming to AstroCafe. This is our 4th AstroCafe of the year. We've got 2 more left in the year. Next month, we're going to have the CTO for the International Space Station, which is a national lab, coming. That's Dan Giles. And then November 16th, we're going to have Dr. Joseph Pelton, who is with the Hudson Institute. Joe is one of the original proponents of commercial space, a very big name in space. Joe will give a great presentation for us. And then we'll be moving into next year's program. So just as a reminder, what we do in NYSA, we're a public benefit corporation, but our goal is to posture the New York community to participate in the private space industry. All right, our belief is that this is like the early 1400s, and we're in Europe, and we're thinking about the new world. What investment opportunities are in the new world? That's where we are today in looking at new space, right? And there's a lot of areas where the New York community can and should participate. So we're trying to create a ecosystem here where we recognize these new opportunities and we step up to them with the great capabilities that New York has to offer. Again, we're in a great era right now. Guys like Allen, Branson, Musk, Bezos, they might have a business case for space, but they definitely have a passion and a vision for space. These guys are creating a bow wave of new expectations of what can be done in space. And what we're seeing is, because of their large investments, the barriers to engineering space and to practical solution development has been vastly reduced. That means John Q, public engineer, who's thinking about how to solve a global problem, can now pragmatically use space. The ability to use small space, the ability to use big space. I mean, Jeff Bezos being able to carry 50,000 kilograms to low Earth orbit is not exactly small space, but the ability to do that creates new opportunities for us to solve global problems. There are many of you out here and people in this industry who are looking for a new perspective to solve global problems, thinking about them from the perspective of how do we address them, realizing the reality of the oneness of humanity. But they lack the technology, or they lack the domain experience in space and entrepreneurship. Okay? So NYSA wants to play a role to help bridge that gap. NASA is going to be a great partner with us to help bridge that technology gap. We're going to reduce the barriers to introducing NASA technology into the New York ecosystem community. And when it comes to bringing in the domain experience in space and entrepreneurship, we have a network of partners to help with that. The old saying is, it takes a village to raise a child. It takes a village to raise a startup company. Okay, Silicon Valley works because there is an ecosystem between academia, industry, and finance. Okay, we're trying to create that here. Very pragmatically, we're trying to drive economic growth. How do we do that? The blocking and tackling of NYSA is around these 4 programs. We create a virtual accelerator, which is an online 3-day training program to bring startups forward. We work with the Founders Institute on a space boot camp, which is a 3.5-month program where, I'll be very frank with you, when companies come through that program, they are ready to go in front of investors. They are really investment worthy at that point, because it's a very rigorous program the Founders Institute has that we work with. We also have a program called Innovation Exchange, and Mike Turillo is here from Swarm Intelligence. This is an online platform by which we can use this Watson-empowered environment to propose problems, to work on problems, to solve problems in an open sharing type format. We also are trying to develop a program called Hacking for Space, which builds off a program called Hacking for Defense, where we're trying to insert a lean startup methodology course in universities so that senior level students can take on problems, work in the lean startup methodology, and use space as a solution to solve big problems. These are the blocking and tackling how we do things in NYSA. This is the splash page for the Innovation Exchange. I encourage everyone to do two things. Please get on the Innovation Exchange, nysa.theinnovationexchange.co. Everyone can join. It's free. It's a really cool environment. It takes a little bit of work to be able to get in there and be productive, but you have access to tons of technology, an actual Watson-empowered environment for proposing problems, solving problems. It's a great place. The other thing that I ask you to do is please like our Facebook page. That's where we post most of our events and most of our updates. I don't post what I had for lunch on there, so it's just NYSA stuff. Okay, we also do advisory services. We work with existing companies who want to look at how to leverage the disruption of new space. We did not work with Coke, but this is an example where Coke invested in OneWeb, which is a communications company, to look at how to globally promote and distribute their product. We partner with existing companies to show them how to come up to speed on actually using new space capabilities that are being made available by a new generation of entrepreneurs. There's more new data coming available that will disrupt industries, so we want to help existing companies, particularly in New York, keep up with that. And we partner with startups. We typically will enter into agent agreements with startups, take a small equity stake, and help drive them to success to developing a business plan that's fundable and to help them actually land funding. We reach across New York State. Okay, we love the city, but we work across the state. And this is sort of a footprint of all of the NASA grant participants in New York State, and they all are basically a point of light for us to work out of. We've highlighted Ithaca because one of our chief advisors, Dr. Mason Peck, is a faculty member at Cornell, and he administers the whole NASA grant program in New York. Some of our supporters, again, NASA, we're fortunate to have about 10 of our colleagues from NASA here with us, headquarters Johnson, Goddard, and Ames. We have a great relationship with the City of New York, the New York EDC, and Karen Bhatia, who I hope is here, is our primary collaborator there, and we're also developing one with the State of New York around economic development. In the industry, Commercial Space Federation, SSPI, who Lou Zaccarella was here with us earlier, and Spacecom, Mr. Steve Wolf is here. And in the private sector, we've got great partners like Ogilvy across the street here, and Hogan Lovells, and of course the wonderful Intrepid Museum, who gives us this venue to use, and the Founders Institute, and academic institutes like Cornell and Columbia. The executive leadership team is really Sydney, myself, and Sean Casey, who's out in Silicon Valley. He runs a group called the Silicon Valley Space Center out there. So NYSA is really tightly coupled to Silicon Valley space community through Sean. So there's sort of a very active, dynamic coherence between the city activities and what's happening out in Silicon Valley. We've got a great team of technical advisors and other financial advisors. I mean, Jeff Mamber, for example, runs NanoRacks. Hoyt Davidson is a active investor and a promoter in the city area. Carissa is a great marketing intelligence person, and Greg, of course, board member and secretary of the X Prize Foundation. So we've got very deep roots in the city that we've pulled together into a group that can help support this ecosystem. Again, industry partners, I think I've mentioned everybody here. Great group. So today is kind of a momentous event. I'm going to introduce Dan in a bit, but we've signed a Spaced Act agreement today, which allows NYSA to serve as a conduit for using NASA technology and in helping to inject them into startups. So we're developing an ecosystem here where we're fueling our ecosystem with NASA technology. We're working across the New York community to bring forward entrepreneurs, and we're working with corporations to help on-ramp these technologies. So this is, I think, a great time to be a space entrepreneur, to be a space wantrepreneur, and to work with us to help make this vision real. We've got the technology, we've got the end customers. What we need is bright people who really have a passion to change and improve the world and who want to use space to help do that. Okay, so that's it for me. I want to introduce Dan Lockney. Dan runs the NASA Technology Transfer Program, and Dan's going to talk about the great things that can be done using NASA technology. And then we're going to have Tom Wilson, who's Senior VP with Northrop Grumman Innovation Systems, come up and talk about, I would almost call it a case study of how tech transfer can grow from the acorn into that mighty oak. Tom's family actually worked at NASA at one point and evolved into some very big things they're doing right now that he'll talk about, and I think you'll really enjoy. So, NYSA is all about the pragmatic use of space to grow economic activity. We love Star Trek and stuff, but we love seeing real economic activity happen. So with that, let me introduce Dan Lockney, please welcome him, and he will talk about NASA.
Thanks, Joe. Hey, how are you, everybody? So, I'm Dan Lock. Can you hear me? Yeah. You sure? I got to hold it closer? Ugh. All right. So my name is Dan Lockney. I'm from NASA headquarters in Washington, D.C., where I manage the agency's technology transfer program. And I'll tell you about that in a minute. But first, have you all heard of NASA? All right, I knew that one. Okay, so NASA, we're actually approaching our 60th birthday. It'll be on Monday. NASA will be 60 years old. October 1st is the day we celebrate. So happy birthday, NASA. So what have we done in what did I say, 60? What have we done in 60 years? Well, you know, we went to the moon. That was pretty cool. And we went to, where else did we go? Put rovers on Mars. We had a bunch of like robots rovering around Mars right now. And we visited every planet in the solar system. We've left the solar system. We built this International Space Station, which is pretty cool. Humans living in space and over a decade now, continuously orbiting the Earth. That's pretty cool. Hubble Space Telescope. Building the James Webb Space Telescope. What else am I missing? Time travel, teleportation. So you know all this stuff, right? Alien technology. Yeah, I don't need to tell you guys this stuff. Okay, so you all know about NASA. And NASA's pretty cool, right? I like it. One of the constants throughout the agency's history, 60 years, is one of the missions that's been constant, no matter what the agency's been doing, is technology transfer. And tech transfer is written into the Foundational Space Act that created NASA, the legislation that said, Congress, they got together and they agreed and they said, yeah, you all should have a space program. But they had the foresight, and this is amazing, to say, don't just, I'm paraphrasing, don't just blast technologies off into space, but make sure the technology comes back down to Earth in the form of practical terrestrial benefit. And that's tech transfer, the process of doing that. So every time NASA does something new, which is kind of the name of the game for us, or anytime we develop a new technology, solve a problem that hasn't been solved before, work on something that nobody's even thought of, we can't just like run out to Target or run out to Home Depot and buy the parts. You can't go to, we gotta start from scratch and make all this stuff. Challenge, we survey the state of the art and we go, yeah, nobody's ever done this before, so we make something new. So continuously throughout the process, throughout the history of the agency, 60 years, every year NASA technologists, scientists, engineers, chemists, biologists, anybody working in technical areas at NASA, they run into these challenges, they come up with something new. Every year we've averaged about 2,000 new technologies, 2,000 inventions. That's a lot of invention. So what my office does, and we're located all across the country. NASA has 10 field centers. We have a Goddard Space Center in Maryland. We've got 3 in California, including JPL. We've got one in Houston. Houston, we have a problem, that Johnson Space Center. We do the launches out in Florida, Cape Canaveral, Kennedy Space Center. So we're in Ohio, in Cleveland. Right? So we're all over the place. So these inventions get created at these centers, and we have an office, a tech transfer office at every one of these centers, and we look at it, and the first thing we go, is this a real thing? Does it work? Is it a concept? Is this guy crazy? Like, what is this? Because it's all new stuff. We don't know, and sometimes it is crazy. And we go, all right, thank you. So we get these new inventions, we look at it, does it work? And then we say, if it does work, who else could use it? Outside of the mission application, where else could this be used? And that's where we get excited. We think, oh, you know, this could be over here, this could be over there. And we spin these things off into new industries and secondary applications. And that's what I'd like to tell you about. So, you all think, oh, yeah, I know where this guy's going. Yeah, Tang, Teflon, and Velcro. That's not us. We didn't do those. We didn't do Tang. What we did do, you might not know this, is the cell phone camera. What? The cell phone camera? Yeah, the actual camera that's in your cell phone. We have royalties being paid to us from all the companies that make those things in your pocket. Like they pay JPL, Caltech, cell phone. So you're like, I don't know, I don't believe this guy. Look it up, you can Google it. Eric Fossum is his name. He's the inventor. He's in the National Inventors Hall of Fame. He was working on a lightweight, high-resolution camera that didn't draw a lot of power for satellite applications. You got to make it lightweight, right? And you take it into space. So we developed this digital, small, on a chip digital camera, and we brought it through the tech transfer process. Which who else could use this? So this is 1990s-ish, and we're looking at it, and we're like, all right, who could use a little camera like this? And we're like, I know, spies. So we're picturing like the spy movies where like you sneak into the office, like you open up the file cabinet and you're like, you pull out the file that like has the evidence in it and you like snap that little picture. We're like, yeah, that's who's going to use it. And we're like, yeah, we figured this out. It turns out that's a very small market. And we didn't really get as far as we wanted to with it. And then some innovative company came in, Nokia, and they go, I got an idea. I think somebody else could use this thing. And we said, who? And they said, you could put it in a phone. And we said, that's ridiculous. Phones are for talking to people. And well, who's gonna want that? And then Nokia, forward thinking, they go, I'll tell you. Japanese teenagers, Japanese teenage girls. They would love this. And we go, what are you talking about? There's this kawaii culture in Japan where there's this obsession with cuteness. And teenage girls in Japan would love to take pictures of fashion and cupcakes and like dazzling cute things and like little plastic frogs and share it amongst each other. And there's a market, you won't believe it. And we're like, all right, yeah, go ahead, see what you can do. So fast forward, what is it, 2018 now? Thank you. So fast forward, it's 2018 now. And it turns out that there was really a market. But they'd underestimated it, and they'd failed to realize that deep inside, like, we're all Japanese teenage girls. And when Joe said, I don't post pictures of my lunch, half of us were like, but you could, right? So I was curious. I was like, what'd you have? I bet it was good. So I got notes here which will prevent me from just talking to you all day, which I could. They're kind of weird. They say like lost monkey and whale shark. And those are all, okay, lost monkey. So I'm only going to talk for a few minutes, but I could do this for hours. So at some point, somebody's got to be like, Dan, stop. Thank you, Alan. So at some point, I'm going to be like, because I get so excited about this. But my basic thinking is that there's so many different examples of how NASA technology can be used. I want to give you a couple broad examples, and then hopefully it kind of sketches together this picture of like, man, it's everywhere. Whale sharks. We developed for our Hubble Space Telescope, deep space imagery, we developed an algorithm for star tracking to make sense of the data that gets back, like gigabytes and gigabytes of like star pictures. And we're like, I don't know, what is it? And we're like, I don't know, it's stars. So we developed these algorithms to make sense and to navigate and figure all this stuff out. That same algorithm we gave to the University of Florida to track whale sharks, because whale sharks, and this is super cute, have a distinctive brindling pattern, a spotting pattern on them that stay the same for the entire life of the animal. So baby whale shark, adolescent whale shark, adult whale shark, they have the same spots on them throughout their entire lives. You can take pictures of them, use the Hubble Space Telescope algorithm, and then determine if that's the same whale shark you saw earlier. It's an endangered species, and we're able to increase the number of whale sharks we're able to track. Similarly, polar bears, also cute. On their muzzles, they have these distinctive freckles that stay the same for the life of the animal. You can snap a picture of a polar bear and then determine if you've seen that same polar bear before, as opposed to the alternative, which is like shooting them with a dart and like putting a tag in their ear and like trying to get out of the way before they wake up. Much, much nicer. What else did I promise you? Oh, you want the swimsuit? Okay, so Speedo came to us in 2006 and asked us to help them create a better swimsuit. And we brought them into our Langley Research Center and let them use their our wind tunnels. And they came out with what ended up being the best swimsuit ever. It's a super buoyant, low profile. We took the zipper out and you glue it onto the body. It's a one-time use for the Olympics, gold medal type races. And 2008 Beijing Olympics, every gold medal winner was wearing this suit that we developed. Every gold medal winner was wearing the NASA suit. It's called the Speedo Laser Racer. People breaking their contracts left and right to get into this thing. Long story short, 2009, International Olympic Committee says, illegal, non-pharmaceutical doping, outlawed. The NASA suit was too powerful. No more. Never been beat either. So then we reached out to a prominent swimmer, whose name I won't use because we told him we wouldn't use this. And we said, hey man, let's say he happened to win a lot of gold medals in swimming. He said, hey man, did you know NASA designed that suit you're wearing? And he says, yeah, I heard about that. That's pretty cool. So can you give us a quote we could use or something? And he goes, yeah, NASA. It's like having a rocket in my pants. And you go, wow, like I can't use that, but I use it all the time. So what else? We're all over the place. I'll give you two more quick ones. Although I said 2 more quick ones, but I'm like 3 because I get too excited. We're building this giant rocket, the SLS, which is going to go to the Mars, which is going to go to Mars. And so we're designing, we're testing this thing out. And one of the challenges we ran into is on the testing of it, it was shaking too much, vibrating on the launch pad. And depending on who you ask, the severity of the vibrations and the frequency got more extreme. Like you talk to the high-level program manager and he goes, oh, it was shaking a little bit. It would have distracted the astronauts at a time when they had to make key decisions, flip a switch or something. And you don't want that, like during launch. You go, all right, you still got to fix it. You go one layer lower and the guy goes, their retinas would have detached. It was really shaking them. And you go, oh, you really got to fix it. Then you talk to the engineers that are actually like solving this problem and he goes, oh, you know what a Vitamix is? Like, really shaking. It's a high-speed blender. So you have to fix this thing. And at this point, we've got the variabilities. We have the time to fix it because it's just a drawing. So at Marshall Space Flight Center in Alabama, we do a lot of really smart rocketry there. We got these guys together and we said, you have to fix this problem. How would you solve this vibration issue? And he said, oh, if it were Earth, throw mass at the problem. Something shakes, you just cover it in concrete. You strap it down, but you can't do that with a vehicle. For example, on this SLS, this rocket that's going to take us to Mars, we actually changed the paint job in order to save 700 pounds. You can't add new stuff to this thing, right? You can't add a new piece of hardware that makes it stop shaking or some sort of device. So we developed a simple baffle system that uses the liquid fuel, and it contains the slosh. As this thing starts shaking, you grab the slosh and you control that centralized mass, and through this baffle system, you make the whole tall thing stop shaking. So we said, cool, who else could use that? Who else has tall, skinny things and they don't want them shaking? Ooh, architects, skyscrapers. So a couple of us flew up to New York, and we came up here and we met with the world's largest builder of high-rises and towers and skyscrapers, and we pitched it to them, and they said, NASA? And we said, yeah, and they said, all right, come on in. And we showed them everything we're working on, and we showed them our 400-foot tall vibration test facility in Marshall Space Flight Center in Alabama, which I've been told is not the tallest building in Alabama, but it might be. So we brought it up here, and they said, you know what? Impressive. We like what you're doing. This is a mature industry. We're good. All right. So we're walking out the door, and we turn around. We're like, hey, you see, you guys are number 1. They said, yeah. That who's number 2? And they're like, number 2. I guess that would be Thornton Tomasetti. So Thornton Tomasetti will tell you they're number 1. So the next day, we went and saw Thornton Tomasetti. And we said we developed this vibration technology for tall buildings and skyscrapers. And they said, we're actually working on a building that needs some sort of vibration mitigation. It's in Brooklyn. This Barclay building, right outside the Barclay Center, the B2 building, this big apartment building. It's a modular construction. Generally with construction, you put I-beams together and you wrap the skin, and it has a flexibility inherent to that type of design. But because they were plugging this thing together like Lego pieces, it was particularly rigid, and you're not in an earthquake zone there. But there's a lot of wind that whips through, and they said, we're kind of worried about this building. And because it's a modular design, we actually didn't entirely plan for traditional vibration dampening system, a 2-mass damper or something. And we said, have we got the solution for you? Anyways, long story short, it's on top of the building. You can see it. We installed it. It was commissioned in June of last year. So that's a Mars technology that was available. We're literally out hustling, shopping these things around, telling people the capabilities, and we're giving them to people to use. So before I tell the last story, and then I'll stop. Before I tell the last story, you're like, all right, well, that sounds like good for them. But no, but it's good for you too. That's what we're doing up here with the New York Space Alliance. We're trying to bring these technologies up to New York. We think you guys have the infrastructure, the capabilities, the smarts, the money, the resources to actually bring these things to market. But if you're interested in seeing our portfolio, technology.nasa.gov, or Google NASA technology and you'll get it, or Google Tech Transfer NASA, or any combination of the words that you hear tonight. We have a portfolio of patents that over 1,400. We only patent for commercialization, so it's not just random stuff we've patented. It's stuff that we think has commercial potential. We have 1,000 free software codes at software.nasa.gov, and again, you can just Google all this, you'll find it. Free software, a bunch of patents you could license. We have an open source catalog. We have a public domain catalog of actual drawings to how to make this stuff that you can just use. We also have a remote sensing toolkit that gathers all of our Earth sensing data and tools to manipulate it that we think has great commercial potential. So, last story. This big rocket we're building to go to Mars, we're going to put people on the top of it, which is kind of cool too. So we're building this Orion crew capsule, and we developed a So how it's going to land? Remember I Dream of Jeannie? Okay, sorry. Do you remember like Gemini and Apollo and Mercury, which I guess is a more reasonable example? Because Mercury, Gemini, Apollo, those are real. That I Dream of Jeannie, that's not entirely real. I gotta work on my references. So the way those capsules came back down to Earth is with the parachute, right? It's like a conical capsule, and it kind of swung back down and landed in the ocean. So we developed a parachute that's supposed to kind of like cradle these guys and bring them back down to the Earth real gently. We also, during Apollo era, and then this is how I get started. During Apollo era, we actually we had concerns that it would flip once it landed, and then the astronauts get eaten by sharks, and that's like really bad news. So we developed this like water ballast, like a simple net that dragged underneath the capsule to prevent it from flipping over, and that's now used in life rafts. So I told him I would finish this real quick. So a Rowan crew capsule. We've got this parachute that we developed, and we had to test it because testing in space is really expensive. You want to make sure you get it just right. So we developed a camera to take pictures of the parachute and get as much data as humanly possible from it. So we've got a video camera we developed that can go from a closed aperture to like bright open as the explosive hatch comes off of this parachute container. The parachute comes up, we get a bunch of data from it. 12 gigabytes of data per second at high resolution. So that's a super camera that didn't exist before. We ended up giving it to the National Transportation Safety Bureau, and they're using it for highway testing. We've also given it to several Hollywood studios for action films, which I'm super excited about. So, awkward transition now. Tom Wilson, Northrop Grumman. He's a really interesting guy. I met him earlier this afternoon, and he has some nice stuff to tell you. And you guys got enough out of me. Thanks. Control alt.
I don't think I need that. I think I'm wired up. Maybe you take it out in the audience. Well, good evening, everybody. That's going to be a hard act to follow. It was. So my name's Tom Wilson, and I'm a space entrepreneur from a long time ago. I started when I was 10 years old. My father actually designed the tiles on the space shuttle to help to survive re-entry, the thermal control tiles. He got a check as a result of doing that and started a company in 1978 called Swales Aerospace. I was 10 years old at the time and immediately got brought into the company to help with catering and other things. So long history in space. We sold that company to a company, ATK, in 2007 that then merged with Orbital Sciences in 2015 that then was acquired by Northrop Grumman just in June of this year. So I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story about technology that we've been developing for the past really 3 decades and how that's enabled us to take something that we thought was maybe impossible to do, very hard to do, and make it a reality. And that's on-orbit satellite servicing. In terms of the company itself, as you walked in, just before you came in, the last aircraft on the right-hand side was a T-38 built by Northrop. And then if you go all the way back down to the other end of the Intrepid, there's an F-14 Tomcat built by Grumman. So in 1994, Northrop and Grumman got together and formed Northrop Grumman. A lot of airplane history. Today we're about a $26 billion company, about 85,000 employees across the globe, and do things like stealth bombers. We do unmanned aerial vehicles, the Global Hawk and the Triton vehicles, and it's really a massive portfolio of technology and innovation across the defense sector, space, a lot of airborne C4ISR, so intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, as well as space-based ISR. We do a lot of work in the cyber, which is a new and evolving field. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about the business that I work for, Innovation Systems. So as I mentioned, Innovation Systems was really spawned out of the acquisition of Orbital ATK by Northrop Grumman in June of this year. So I'm relatively new to overall Northrop Grumman, but have a long history that I talked about in these businesses. So we develop, Dan talked about SLS, the big, with the sloshing and the motors and all that. So we're actually building the solid rocket motors for SLS, these guys right here. They're derived from the shuttle program. They're a 5-segment instead of 4-segment that was on the shuttle program. A lot of thrust, obviously putting a lot of oscillation into the launch vehicle for the astronauts. We develop a whole other fleet of launch vehicles, propulsion systems. Boeing 787s, if you fly in a Boeing 787, the internal structures, the part that you can't see, not the skin on the outside, but the rings and the spars that run down that aircraft, we manufacture all the internal guts of an Airbus A350 or a Boeing 787. We do a lot of work in the defense business, mostly bombs and bullets, and then space systems. I'm going to talk about that extensively. So to start this off, I have a little video, a couple videos, but this first one will give you a feeling for a little bit of background about our business, kind of where we've come from, where we're going. I will tell you that it's a lot of technology that was developed in cooperation with NASA, that was tech transferred from NASA. So a real theme here across this whole event tonight is NASA tech transfer. Extensively. So to start this off, I have a little video, a couple videos, but this first one will give you a feeling for a little bit of background about our business, kind of where we've come from, where we're going. I will tell you that it's a lot of technology that was developed in cooperation with NASA, that was tech transferred from NASA. So a real theme here across this whole event tonight is NASA tech transfer. This is a small launch vehicle that's used to launch things into low Earth orbit, small satellites. So that's Orbital ATK, now Northrop Grumman Innovation Systems. So then I want to tell you a little bit of a heritage story to lead you up to the on-orbit satellite servicing and how we got there. So it started with us developing geosynchronous communication satellites. So there's a class of orbits about 26,000 miles from Earth that satellites basically rotate at the same rate in that orbit as the Earth rotates. So it allows us to sort of stay above a point on the Earth and look down on it. That's where all the telecommunication satellites, or most of them, are today for all the communications that we use for things like transponding the Olympics, broadcasting it back here, HBO, a lot of DirecTV, Sirius XM, all those satellites are located in that orbit. And we manufacture those satellites in Dulles, Virginia. This is kind of a smaller one, believe it or not. They tend to get very big, about 2-3 times the size of that one. But all this technology that we wrapped up in here in terms of communication technology, the solar array technology, the structural technology that goes behind that, the propulsion technology, that's all part of what we learned with and transferred from39 over a period of decades. This technology allowed us to put about 41 of these things up today. We have 39 of them, and we're building 2 more. for about 22 different customers across the globe. It's sort of a global industry that covers, everywhere that there's people for the most part. You can see these satellites are doing communication services for them. So the other thing that we do is our low Earth orbit satellites and our exploration satellites. So these are based on our LeoStar 2 product line and our LeoStar 3 product line. Programs that are looking down at Earth, doing science missions like Landsat, programs that are doing deep space missions that are looking at, we just launched this test satellite, and it's a planet hunter. So what it's looking at is for exoplanets around other stars, in preparations for the James Webb Space Telescope, so that it doesn't have to spend all its time looking for them. It can start to stare at them in infrared and other bands. So all these satellites, once again, more technology that was transferred from NASA. Almost all these programs, you can see the little NASA symbol. A lot of these programs are done in cooperation with NASA over a period of 3 decades. Dawn was another mission. We went up to, traveled about 3 billion miles to get to 3.5 billion miles. This satellite, Dawn satellite, has traveled over the past couple of decades. Went out to Vesta and Ceres asteroids, did some mapping of the asteroids. You can see some of the data that came back off of Vesta. This shows you that it's as deep as 14 miles and as high as 12 miles on the surface. So very diverse surface characteristics. We were looking at for the origins of how some of the composition of some of these asteroids are made up, and we do a lot of research. Well, NASA's doing all the research, but we build the satellites that help develop this technology. Hubble servicing. So you saw some pictures. Most of those pictures were shown in a very large tank, a water tank, down at Johnson Space Center. But in orbit, we developed these tools, and they look like tools you might find at Home Depot or Sears, but they're far more expensive, have to work in the space environment, have to work off of power systems that are rechargeable but can last for a really long time and handle the space environment. So we developed these tools to help NASA astronauts basically service the Hubble Space Telescope. So there were a few missions that took out cameras, replaced electronics, upgraded the systems themselves, and they needed a lot of tools to be able to do that. Over 140 tools were developed for that. What we've done with that, I'm going to show you in a minute, but we've been able to take that tool technology and mature it into these robotic systems that we're developing today. Here's a picture of our Cygnus cargo delivery. So International Space Station astronauts living there. They need food, they need clothes, they need water. So we use a cargo delivery system that we call Cygnus, that you saw the launch and you saw the docking in that video. And we use it to take about 3.5 metric tons, about 3,500 kilograms, twice a year up to the International Space Station. We use this vehicle to rendezvous and dock with the International Space Station. And then once it's docked, this part here that looks like a giant beer keg is really full of about all the food that you can think of that they would need for the next 6 months. There are other things in there like mice, plants, bees, roaches, other experiments that get done on the International Space Station. We bring it up, we dock with the International Space Station, and we unload all this cargo. Here's kind of a look down from the inside once we've docked. The other thing that we can do is attach on the outside, we can attach payloads, and we can deploy little small satellites out of the outside of it. Things like Planet Labs and other. This is how a lot of their satellites got to orbit. It was on this delivery system. Let's see. So now what we've done is we've taken electric propulsion technology off of the Dawn mission. We've taken the robotic technology off of the Hubble servicing mission. We've taken the spacecraft developed technology off of our GeoStar and LeoStar series of spacecraft. And we began to think about what could we do with all that, similar to what Dan's talking about. Start to think about applications, technologies, what do we have? And we looked at one of the problems, and one of the problems that's out there today is because we build these geosynchronous communication satellites. They're very far away from Earth. We designed them to last for about 15 years because that's sort of the nominal life cycle that you can get onto a launch vehicle. You're kind of launch vehicle limited in terms of how much you can get up. After 15 years, what we found is they're still working very well. electronically, but they run out of fuel. So we basically had to turn them into space junk. We had to take them to what's called the graveyard orbit, turn them off, and they freeze, basically. So when you think about the economics of this, you're spending about $400 million to build, design, launch one of these satellites. You get it up, you get it working, you depreciate that asset over about a 15-year period, and then you have to turn it off and freeze it. So we thought about the idea of what if we were able to revive it or bring it back to life? What if we were able to find it, figure out a way that we could put more fuel into it? Turned out that was really hard to do. Very hard to do, because the satellites really weren't designed to be refueled on orbit. So very complicated thoughts and ways to do that. So we came up with a different, simpler solution, which was to basically put a jetpack on it. And that was kind of the idea that we developed, called our mission extension vehicle. And it's really rendezvous, proximity operations, docking. We attach ourselves to the back end of a satellite. But it builds on all this heritage that we had from all these different technologies and all these different vehicles that I just showed you a few minutes ago. In terms of how it works, probably the best thing to do is just show you the video. I think we're running a little bit close to time, so I'm going to speed up a little bit. But we've developed and tested all this technology in our Rendezvous and Proximity Operations Laboratory in Dulles, Virginia. That's led us to this concept. So the concept here is we launch these things in pairs. The satellite itself will deploy its solar arrays. It also has a communications antenna, and a pair of thrusters will deploy. We're using that same electric propulsion technology that we developed with NASA on the Dawn mission that was doing the rendezvous at the asteroids. We turn these things on, and we take about 6 months to get out to low Earth orbit. I'm sorry, out to geosynchronous orbit. So while we're transitioning, we're testing out all of our systems. Then what we do is we rendezvous. We get about 80 meters away from the back of the satellite. And this looks pretty simple. There's no tractor beam pulling this thing in, but this is actually a series of very complicated maneuvers because the two satellites are moving relative to each other at pretty high rates. We get about 20 meters away. We will use a series of cameras, LiDAR systems, electro-optical systems, laser ranging systems to check everything out, and then we're going to go in and rendezvous and dock with it. What you see are these little stanchions, and we're going to use those to basically attach ourselves, take the structural load through this ring, and 80% of the satellites on orbit have this dormant apogee kick motor, or this nozzle that's here. What we did was we decided to use that nozzle as a way for us to attach ourselves to that satellite. So we send a probe in through that nozzle. On the other side is a throat. We deploy two little fingers on the other side of that throat, and we use it to pull the two together. Seems really simple. Trust me, it's hard. Especially from 26,000 miles away. And that's it. So we dock and we stay attached, and now we have the ability to take over the propulsion attitude control and fly that other satellite around. And we can do that for up to 15 more years. And then when we're done, we can undock from that satellite, and we can go dock to another one. And we can continue to do that over and over again with our system. So what's next is, when we looked at the economics of that, it was interesting, it was compelling. We invested a lot of money, and we're building 2 of those satellites. We will launch the first one of those in May of next year, and the second one of those in the first quarter of 2020. Then we began to think about what's next. What are ways to improve the economics, to make it more affordable for more, a broader marketplace. So we started thinking about a different low-cost way to implement the same kind of rendezvous and docking technology. So we came up with this system we call mission extension pods. And that's a whole different kind of system. Instead of being a big satellite that docks to another big satellite, it's a little tiny satellite, about the size of a dorm room refrigerator, that we use a robotic arm that we're actually developing right now, and we use that to rendezvous and dock that little tiny satellite to the mothership there. So this is the video of how this one works. So this is the same mission extension vehicle type system that I showed you before, but now we've put this ring around it. And on that ring are 12 of these little fuel pods. We take these fuel pods up, same process, launch and take them up. We rendezvous and get really close, about a meter away from our client satellite. said before, these are about the size of a dorm refrigerator. They weigh about 200 kilograms. They're full of mostly just fuel. It's fuel and a couple electronics, a communication system. Relatively simple, small satellites. What's stowed in here is a robotic arm. So we're going to use this robotic arm to reach out, grab one of the fuel pods, and orient it for docking. You'll see that as we're turning it around, after we get it turned around, these things need power as well, because they need to be able to continue to live for about 5 years is what we're sort of targeting these. And we're currently developing this system, so we have not built one of these yet. So what it just extended was a little propulsion boom and a comm boom. On the end here, there's some thrusters and there's a communication antenna for us to be able to talk back to Earth. We're going to come in with our robotic system. We can use all the sensors that are on board our satellite to basically learn what's going on in the movements of the client satellite, matching the rates, and then we can use this compliant robotic arm to insert another probe, very similar to what I showed you before, and use it to pull. This time there's a little disc on the other side here that it pulls in and kind of holds it tight together, and that's how we get the tension and keep it attached. The robot arm releases it. Our big MRV here, Mission Robotic Vehicle, backs away, and then you'll see our little guy here, the pod, will deploy its solar arrays and turn itself on. And what it does from here is it rotates, but of course it doesn't show that because the video just stopped. But it'll rotate up, it'll fire its thruster, it'll rotate back down and it'll fire its thruster. And it does that every 12 hours for 5 years. That's all it does. Pretty boring life, but that's what it does. So what's next? So beyond life extension, we talked about, that's sort of the first way for us to enter this market. But this market's really about something bigger than that. This market's really about the ability to do autonomous robotic operations in space. So we're looking at advanced technologies that we can do on-orbit assembly and repair. So rather than sort of short, stubby arms to be able to attach things, very large robotic arms that we'd be able to use to assemble things like Deep Space Gateway or stations around the moon or stations around Mars or other planets. So very massive space structures. Looking at things like on-orbit manufacturing, also through space transportation. So if NASA's going to go to the moon, we're going to start to put people out there. They've got to eat, just like they do on the International Space Station. They've got to drink. They've got to have clothes. So we're going to have to figure out how to get cargo and things out to them in a very affordable way. So leveraging all these technologies to be able to do all that. We're working on, with NASA Langley right now, on a tech transfer program for these large robotic arms. It's a little hard to see. This is a ground test bed with these robotic arms that I'm talking about that have little welding systems on the end of it so that we can weld very large space structures. We are planning a demo of this technology in the next 5 years, where we're going to take our Cygnus system that we use to dock with the International Space Station, and we're going to test our ability to use these to assemble and install a solar array on our Cygnus. But ultimately, you could see how you could take a couple of these up on a system and be able to assemble very large space structures. So that's where we're going in the future. A little bit of manufacturing technology as well. So we're looking at how we can take 3D printing and apply it to space. So if we want to add things to this, if we want to bolt things together, rather than taking up all these different pieces and components, maybe we can actually use 3D printing to print things in space that we can use to assemble. And everything that we're doing, because a lot of people look at this and they say, well, can't this be used for nefarious things? But everything that we're doing is really for exploration. It's for helping out, basically recycling in space, removing orbital debris, and we're very transparent. We have a lot of licensing from the US government, are working very closely with them. So what we've really focused on, kind of walking you through this, is taking the technology that we've developed and really taking something that people thought was, and told us was science fiction about 10 years ago, and turning that into a reality. That's it. Any questions?
We have one right over here.
Hi.
You got it.
So how many years do the mission extension pods add to the satellite?
The pods one, the little ones?
Yeah, the refrigerators.
Little guys, yeah.
ones.
Those are about 6 years, 5, 6 years.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
In the middle.
Hi, you mentioned that you want to extend the quote-unquote dead satellites to an extra 15 years. Do you think you're going to create more technology that will extend them for longer, or are you going to eventually just cast them aside or maybe like get them out of the Earth?
So our satellites, our mission extension vehicle will last for 15 years. Most of the client satellites, the satellites that we're attaching to, they do have an electronic life that will end at some point. So I don't think that, many of those have already been up for 15 years. My expectation is they're good, based on data we've seen on our satellites, for another 5 to 10 years maybe, but not all the way out to 15 years. That's why we designed our system to be able to unattach and go attach to other satellites, so it can keep doing that. The first contracts that we have are for 5 years each. Thank you. Sure.
Also,
Yeah, so my question is about risks. Right? So there are a lot of risks involved, and could you elaborate on what are the mitigating actions that you plan for your equipment?
Sure. Yeah. So I mean, one of the there's risk all over the place. The biggest risk for us is really in that rendezvous and docking. Because if you've ever watched any movies on space, you see that there's no gravity. Well, there's different gravitational effects. So as you go up and you just sort of tap something, it'll start to really move opposite of the way you tapped it. So you have to very carefully rendezvous and dock with something. It's not like it's just fixed there and you come up to it and plug in. So it's really that rendezvous and docking that's where most of the risk is. Because if we don't do that exactly right and we came up and were to push it instead, it's going to scoot away from us. So we're going to be chasing it around. So that's where we spent most of our time in technology. And all that we test on our robotic lab on the ground. So we have this very large air-bearing floor where we can simulate the sort of contact dynamics of us attaching to another satellite. And we spend a lot of time in that laboratory sort of perfecting that compliant docking system to make sure that it won't push the satellite away. The second thing is those satellites that have been up there for 15 years, our clients, they've developed an electronic charge over that 15 years. They've been using their power system and developing an electronic charge, and we come up with a completely different charge, which means that if we're not very careful about how we sort of balance out those charges, somebody's going to blow up, right? So we have to be very careful about that, and we've got a lot of technology and a lot of patents we've put into developing that. Partner with JPL, actually.
Okay.
Big technology transfer theme with NASA.
right here on your left.
A lot of people put up satellites. Do they bring them back? How do you handle space debris?
Good question. So most of them don't come back. The ones that are close to Earth in low Earth orbit, most of those tend to either stay in low Earth orbit for a long time or they re-enter and burn up in the atmosphere. It's very hard or economically hard to bring a satellite back. It's not really worth it. So those tend to re-enter, and then what you do at other orbits like the geo orbit, geosynchronous orbit, is there's a graveyard orbit that's about 300 kilometers out, and you take your satellite, you push it out there, and you turn it off, and it freezes. That's what I talked about before. So that's where, and they just kind of nutate around that orbit and kind of stay there forever. That's one of the reasons why we developed this system, is because it allows us to reuse some of those satellites, as opposed to having to keep throwing them away every 15 years. But right now, they stay up there forever.
Question.
Well, it's a pretty big space, especially out at the geo orbit. So right now, that's not a problem. In low Earth orbit, it's becoming an increasing problem, especially other governments have tested weapons where they've blown up other satellites. That creates massive amounts of debris. Things as small as this that are flying around in space. Other satellites have collided with each other and exploded and create lots of debris. So there is a big concern about orbital debris in low Earth orbit. That's a big problem, and it's going to continue to be a problem until we sort of figure out ways to resolve that. There are companies that are looking at technologies to be able to help to address that. We've actually started to look at technology of a large carbon fiber mesh that we could put up, and basically as debris were to fly through it, it would basically turn it to sand out the other end. So there are technologies that are being looked at and developed, but no one has figured out how to solve that problem yet. It is a problem.
Okay, in the back.
So you talked about it took millions of dollars to develop the MEVs, and Northrop Grumman has been around for a really long time.
Yeah.
What is, I mean, there are a bunch of space entrepreneurs in the audience right now. Can you talk about what the space is like for the wannabe little disruptive space entrepreneur, and how do you even start to think about, developing a project that will eventually cost millions and millions of dollars to put into space when it's just an idea on a piece of paper?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I personally worked on this idea. I had the idea in 2007. It took until 2016 to get it funded. So one thought is perseverance, right? And it's hard. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I got told no. I got told, this is science fiction, it will never work. Just, a lot of negativity. But I had the advantage, unlike many of the little guys, that at the right point in time when I was able to figure out the right amount of technology and kind of have the right business model, and it all kind of came together, I had a parent company that could invest a few $100 million. That doesn't exist. So I mean, your challenge is going to be to try to convince somebody else to invest that money in you. So what I would say is, it's a lot about technology, intellectual property, who owns that intellectual property, and really it comes down to your business case. Do you have a business case that makes financial sense? Other than that, hang in there. It's tough. I think you're starting to see more and more larger companies in the space industry, in particular, Boeing, Airbus, I know, does it a lot, Thales does it a lot, where they're starting to look at ways to make investments in some of these small ideas and some of these companies themselves, just because combination of technology is moving at such a fast rate that they can't assume that they're going to do it all in-house. So they're looking for ways to kind of outreach and capture some of that innovation that's going on. So you can start to talk to some of those companies as well.
Okay, again in the back.
Yep.
Here.
Do you guys have any projects on space mining or human space flight?
So for human space flight, we do not fly people, but we deliver, like I said, our focus is on delivering supplies to people that are operating in space. We also, like I said, do the solid rocket motors that help to launch the humans to space. Did it for the space shuttle program, doing it for SLS program, but we don't ourselves deal with humans in space. Although we are looking at that Cygnus, that big beer keg thing I showed you, turning that into a potential habitat. If we use it to take cargo out to lunar orbit and they unload all the cargo, you could actually use that as another habitat or another interim module to live or work in. So we're looking at that idea as well.
Okay, over here on your left.
Hi, my questions are about the frozen satellites. My first question that I was going to ask is how you guys go and find them, and it sounds like you just go to the satellite graveyard, if I understood you correctly.
We get it before it goes to graveyard. So we get it, we go rendezvous and dock when it's still in orbit. Although we can go to graveyard orbit and get it, but we have to get them before they're frozen. Once they're frozen, it would take way too much energy to thaw them out, and they probably would never work again. So we get them just before they go frozen. Just as they're running out of fuel, we attach to them.
Okay, and then the second question was going to be about how many satellites do you think you can do what you're proposing with?
Great question. So there's 385 or so commercial satellites in that orbit, and another 100 or so more government satellites. It's a target-rich environment. We're building 2 MEVs, so that's 2. So that's one of the reasons why we're looking at this pod system, is because if we can start taking up 12 at a time, we can start doing more and more. Not all the satellites, it doesn't make sense for everybody. Some of the satellites are failing electronically, or they've had other problems with solar arrays. There's some that just aren't working very well. So it makes sense to graveyard those and launch new ones. But there's plenty up there. Our target is to try to get to about 50 or 60 of them. At that point in time, we think that the market may be captured, and then there'll be a few more every year. But right now, it's in that target range.
Okay, we have time for one more question. Over here on your right.
Hi. You mentioned a lot of the kind of time that you guys put into developing what you described as a fairly complicated system for attaching to satellites that weren't meant to be docked. Is anyone looking into standardizing or creating interfaces to actually, for future satellites to not need this much investment?
It's a great question. We are. So recognizing the effectiveness of this, what would be better is if you had a satellite that had a fuel port on it that was on the outside of the satellite that you could pump more fuel into it, or that had a power port on the outside, like a USB port where you could plug into it, and that had a simple little grab bar on it rather than having to do that complicated docking thing. If you just come up and grab a grab bar. So we're actually developing our communication satellites that we sell. We sell those communication satellites, and we're starting to make them so that they are serviceable in the future. So 15 years from now, whoever comes after me will be able to design systems that are much more advanced and be things. I think it's right there. Things other than just do life extension to those.
All right, please thank Tom Wilson for us. All right, I want to thank you all for coming this evening, and our next AstroCafe will be, I think it's the third Friday of October, where Randy Giles, CTO of the International Space Station, will be coming. And also, I want to encourage you guys to please get on our Innovation Exchange. This is an active system we're running here. I think one of the great examples Tom shows is some of the potential on-ramps for new startups to move into active space activities. So please hang around. There's lots of wine that's still available. And I want to thank Tejbal from Google for sponsoring our beverage selection this evening. Thank you very much. And please hang out and mingle, and let's develop a new space economy. Thank you.
See what you do. Everybody smiles at you.
All right, there we go. That should be that. It's going to hiccup for a second, but I'm here. The lower third's still down there. We need to figure that out right quick. Let me fix that. Boop. Yeah, there we go. Now that thing's gone, and transition that. Beep. There you go. Cool. I'm back. How's it going, y'all? So that was the AstroCafe presentation out at the Intrepid Sierra and Space Museum in New York. I'm not in New York right now. I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina, but that's the first time we've ever done that. And we went to the remote camera that was being operated out in New York. That was the live view, and we had the community member volunteering to run the camera out there, Ereboros, who's probably now starting to pack things up and stuff like that. And I'm back here in the studio in Charlotte, and we could actually build that satellite that we just saw in Kerbal. Because how cool is that? I want to actually see. I mean, we've got a little bit of time here to do stuff like that.